Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm super excited to be here. It's my first time in Egypt. And I want to start by giving a huge round of applause for our organizer, and Maya and her team have been absolutely fantastic in getting me here. So let's start with that. So I'm so excited to be here because I've always been completely fascinated by your culture and your history. And in fact, I want to start with a question. What do sleep temples, neuromarketing, and Facebook have in common? Think about it. They all tap into your subconscious mind, as do your phones, your TVs. Any type of content that you ingest actually talks to your subconscious mind to drive your decision making. Sorry. But neuromarketing and the idea of tapping into your subconscious mind to drive decision making isn't new. It actually goes back to your backyard, to Machiavelli, and to Edward Bernays. So who is Edward Bernays? Edward Bernays is the founder of PR as we know it. In the 1920s, he called PR the engineering of consent. Does that sound familiar? And what he did is that he applied his uncle, Sigmund Freud's principles to convincing the masses to do everything from propaganda for the war to selling them mass-produced products during the peacetime. So for instance, he's the one who convinced women to start smoking for the first time. Because women didn't used to smoke, so the US Tobacco Company went to Bernays in the 20s and said, we're missing half our market. We need women to start smoking. So what he did is essentially the first ever influencer campaign. He got socialites in New York to pose at the front of the Easter parade, starting to smoke cigarettes for the first time in public, named them freedom torches, tapping into women's desire to emancipate and tying it into voting back then. So why does that matter? Because what Freud used to say, and it's still accurate today, is that 90% of our decision making is subconscious. So you remember when you were told in school that you only use 10% of your brain? So that is still true. There's actually only one person who uses 100% of her brain, and she's going to be joining me on the stage, joining me after on the stage, and that's Sophia. But why does that matter today? Because this is how marketing actually started. Understanding that features and practicality do not make people buy things they don't need. Okay, and that does not make the economy grow. It doesn't make the pie bigger. So Bernays talked US manufacturers into understanding that he can sell mass products to people who don't need them by tapping into their desires, by tapping into their subconscious desires. And that's how we now have an economy that's based on desire and not need. And this is the beginning of consumerism as we know it today, and the global economy that we know today, right? Because if you think about it, and we saw our speakers talk about this before too, now we buy things because they make us happy, right? We're at a time where we illogically go and buy a new car before the old one's broken. We book incredibly lavish vacations, or we line up for the new iPhone just because we want them, not because we need them. So what else changed the economy? So if you think about it, about 50 years ago, another way the economy grew, and we've seen all the economic boom between the world wars and after the world wars, is the way we look at money and currency, and down to cryptocurrency today, right? So think about this very simple example of how we tap into the subconscious mind. Think about when you go shopping and you use cash versus a credit card, right? When you use cash, you count the money that you have, you see how much you have left in your wallet, you hand it over to the cashier in return for your purchases, okay? It's gone. When you use a card, you hand over the card, you don't really think about what's on there, and then you get it back with your purchases. So suddenly, in your mind, you don't perceive a loss. That simple fact, testing out bank cards, which I think Bank of America did for the first time 50 years ago, doubled the US economy within just a few years, because suddenly you are not perceiving loss. And loss is one of the biggest motivators. The fear of loss is one of the biggest motivators of humankind. But I'm not here today to scare you that neuromarketing is this like evil science that tries to manipulate the masses. On the contrary, I'm here to tell you that we live in a beautiful time where every day and every year and every month, we learn more and more about how our mind works, how decisions happen, and how we evolve as a species. And we do that with the aid of technology. But as we grow and evolve and understand more and more, we are also responsible for applying these learnings ethically. We're responsible for understanding who the consumer is that we speak to and how do they make decisions, but then be very, very respectful of the privacy of their data. We're responsible for building products and campaigns that support the consumers and support the community, right? Not work against them. And we're responsible for bringing all of this to life in a way that helps future generations grow and learn and evolve, not hold them down and not manipulate them. So we're going to do this by looking at the past and the future, at the good and the bad, at corporations and governments. So going back to Eddie Bernays, in 1928, he published a book called Propaganda, where he outlined his principles on PR. And what he said was very interesting. Any human action can be used for social good or can be manipulated to be antisocial. And that is the truth that we still live in today, right? He could have not even imagined that the learnings of propaganda he used during the war and then to sell cigarettes to the masses are actually going to be used by the Nazis to build the Third Reich just a few years later. Just like Mark Zuckerberg could not even imagine that the platform he built at 19 in his dorm room at Harvard, essentially to say which chick is hot or not, is going to be used today to manipulate elections globally. But whether it's 1928 or 2018, one thing hasn't changed, which is the way we make decisions as humans. Our minds still work the same way, and 90% of the decisions are still subconscious. What has changed, however, is the advent of technology. Wow, Eddie Bernays could not have even imagined such a perfect platform for propaganda that we have today, just using social media, right? But Cambridge Analytica brought that dream into reality when he applied the learnings and the platform of social to the masses. Over 2 billion people are being plugged in around the world every day, to the point where now the platform itself has become as addicting as the message or the cigarettes were 80 years ago, 100 years ago. So let me take a step back and ask you a question. How many of you look at your phone as the last thing you see before you go to bed? Raise your hands. Yep, look around you. Look around you. We now have completely changed the habit of humanity, okay? Everywhere around the world, we all go to bed in a dark room with our faces lit up by the blue light of the phone as we inject the last bit of content into our brain before we fall asleep. Can you imagine a better way to tap into our brains at scale? Right? But why should you care now? You should care now. Neuromarketing isn't new, right? We talked about the fact that it dates back to Eddie Bernays. About 30 years ago, neuroscience started becoming a thing. But what really has changed in the past 24 to 36 months that made it really hot is the application of AI to neuromarketing, which means that for the first time, AI gets added and compounded with the way we look at decision making. AI is Sophia. Hi, Sophia, looking good. But what does AI give us? What does technology give us? It looks at the way we make decisions in two ways. First of all, it is used to measure our cognitive behavior, right? So it's gathering all of the data in real time at scale globally. And it also works as the delivery mechanism for the messages in a very, very specifically targeted way globally as well. The one thing it doesn't do, and that's the one thing that you are all responsible for, is the creative that changes the way you think and that brings you to action. But one thing that is very interesting, especially today, sitting here on stage, that changed over the past month really is, how many of you have been following the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal, right? So what we see right now is the way that AI has been used, even recently, completely changed the way that people vote or purchase. But I believe right now that we don't even know how far that has gone. I believe that we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg in the way this application has worked globally. And I'm really interested to find out more. As a matter of fact, at the heart of this scandal is Alexander Kogan, who's the neuroscientist, right, that's been pinpointed as the mastermind of the Cambridge Analytica issues. But let's remember that he worked with Cambridge University and Facebook itself to come up with algorithms that, frankly, when overlaid with all the data metrics we give away for free, far surpass anything neuromarketing can do by measuring your brain waves. So let's talk a little bit about how the brain betrays you on a daily basis, right? So you see these two lines. Which line is longer? Top or bottom? You want to say bottom, don't you? But it's not. They're actually equal length. This is one of the very, very classic neuromarketing and neuroscience tests out there. Right, let's do another one. Which square is darker, A or B? Yeah. They're actually the exact same color. Your mind is tricking you, and even after I told you that your mind is tricking you, you still see A as darker. This is the way that your mind filters everything that you do in real time and only shows you a certain type of information that leads to your decision making. Let's do another quick one. Oh. So, there we go. What do you see? You see a spiral? It's actually concentric circles. So here's the thing. People love taking these tests, and people love talking to themselves. As a matter of fact, they love it so much that it releases dopamine in their brains when they do. And that is why Kogan was able to use his little personality test to gather the data of 87 million people on Facebook, because we all love doing this. But let's talk a little bit, switch gears a little bit about why your brain does what it does. Okay, Daniel Kahneman won a Nobel Prize for prospect theory just a few years back. And prospect theory is the theory of decision making. And what he argues is that the brain is driven by two systems. System one is the old system, is the oldest part of the brain. It's called the reptilian brain. It's very fast, it's involuntary, it's associative. This is the guy that keeps you alive and tells you if you're happy or not, if you like something or not, okay? This is also the guy who drives most of your decision making, by the way. And then we have system two. So system two is the newest part of the brain in the front. It's called the neocortex. It's very slow, very conscious, very logical, and follows rules. So if I ask you what's 1 + 1, you immediately know the answer, right? 1 + 1 is 2. That's your system one. If I ask you what's 11 × 24, whoa, system two just kicked in. You suddenly had to stop all the other thinking that you have and start in your head trying to calculate or figure out what's the easiest way for you to find out what 11 × 24 is. That's the difference between those two systems. But how do we know that? We know that because neuroscience has been measuring the way our brain works. And there's a lot of different ways that this started, from fMRIs, right, that measure your magnetic brains. They scan your brain to see what part lights up depending on the emotions that you have. And by the way, it's been argued, especially recently, that fMRIs don't really work that well anymore. But then we started working with EEGs, and EEGs are still big in neuromarketing, but they're still quite limited, right? So the cool thing about EEGs, sorry, the cool thing about EEGs is that, okay, is that it's able to tell you very much in real time how you're reacting to content. So for instance, if you plug in a group of 50 or 100 people to EEGs while they watch a video, in a very simple way, you can see if they like it, their left part of the brain starts showing a lot of activity, which means that they want to approach it. And if they don't like it, then the right part is starting activity, so they want to back off. So that's very interesting when you want to see brain activity and sentiment in real time. But the coolest thing that I'm excited about when it comes to neuromarketing is biometrics, facial reading, and pupillometry, which means that you're able to look at skin conductivity, heart rate, and how your eyes react to different content in real time, which means that it's a much more scalable way of looking at neuromarketing and measuring how people feel and want to make decisions about things. But all of those mechanisms to measure brain cognition are really old school compared to what's new now, compared to how AI can truly tap into how we behave online, even in an unconscious manner. How much we look at a content, where our cursor stops, where our eyes are gazing, and is able to overlay that with so many data metrics that we give away for free, right? So I think there's 96 different data metrics that we can give away. So AI can tell without even touching our body, just by looking at our faces and seeing how much time we spend where, and what we click on and where to react in real time for, how long have we each been on Facebook? Maybe 10 years or more? It can tell you way better than any brain scans can what you're gonna like and how you're gonna react. And this is what we've been seeing today, right? Because ultimately people actually cannot express what their brains are thinking. There's a really funny example of this that Cheetos did quite a few years ago, where they showed people hooked up to EEGs a video of someone dumping a bag of bright orange Cheetos in a load of whitewash. And everybody said when they filled out the surveys that they didn't like the video. But the brain scans showed that they actually loved it because it was really funny, but they felt really bad about loving it, so they said no, okay? This means that really polls and surveys and big data and small data, anything that's self-expressed doesn't really work, right? That's why we see big campaigns like the Pepsi one we just saw, right? Fail because it's based on data that's self-expressed. And people are not able, and sometimes they're not willing, to tell you why they made the decision they made. Because System 1 did it really fast for them, right? But they're going to try to come up with a justification of why they did it, and that's how they're going to steer you guys creative on the wrong path. But there's a lot more data out there that we don't have access to as marketers, that Facebook and Google gathers on us. In fact, there's so much data we don't even know exactly what's out there about us, but we know it's incredibly powerful if it started not just driving billion-dollar industries of advertising, but actually driving decision-making at the polls. And you know what? The big agencies, the Fortune 500s, and even Nielsen realize that they're way behind the game when it comes to data. So they're trying to catch up by building neuromarketing labs and getting their hands on as much data as possible. But ultimately, they're never going to be able to rival the amount and depth of data that's being sourced through Facebook and Google, okay? But how does that come back to you? Well, let's face it. We can't really all hook up to EEGs 100 people every time we want to launch a new campaign to see how they feel about it. Just like I can set all of you guys up with brain scanners and biometrics reader to see how you like my talk. Okay, even though I kind of wanted to, but I had to use my brain for that. But what I did do, potentially, or I might have tried, is to apply a few neuromarketing techniques to this content to make you guys take it in better and enjoy it. So first, let's look at how the brain works, right? So when you have a stimuli, I'm talking or there's beautiful lights twirling on the walls, you immediately feel emotion, right? You good or bad, you like it, you want to run, there's some sort of emotion. But that emotion is based on memory. Because there's a memory that tells you that light is good and darkness is bad, let's say. Then you interpret that memory by using either your System 1 or System 2 to make a decision and get to a behavior, and that happens incredibly fast. But memory is really, really what drives your decision-making and your behavior. I was just talking to one of my friends a couple weeks ago who runs NeuroInsight, which is a research lab in New York that measures brain activity in real time for huge Fortune 500 companies. And he said to me that one of the biggest misunderstandings in neuromarketing is that emotion drives decision making, and it's not. It's memory. Because there's several types of memories. One, it's your reptilian memory, right? Your survival memory. That one you're born with. That is why one of the biggest things that we see in neuromarketing is social proof. So social proof means that we are all born with the instinct that we need to be part of the herd, because when we're in the middle of the herd, we're safe. If we're on the sides or if we're alone, we're gonna get eaten and die. That applies exactly the same way to marketing. People, when they don't have time to make a decision or think of a choice, will go with the popular choice. So when you use in your marketing talk that only 10% of people have discovered this new miracle detergent, nobody's gonna buy it because it doesn't feel safe to them. You always have to talk to the majority and about the majority, right? Then there's another type of memory, which is familiarity, which is how you build a brand and why branding is so important. Because when you recognize something familiar, your brain actually releases dopamine. It makes you feel good to recognize a pattern that's familiar. So when you know a brand and you love it, even when they come out with a new product, you're gonna want it because it's safe and it's familiar, right? So there's other ways that we look at neuromarketing principles. We look at the element of surprise, because your brain makes decisions so fast that you have to stop it in its tracks. So for instance, if I say to you, money doesn't grow on trees, right? Your brain immediately went there. But if I switch it to money doesn't grow on brains, you're gonna stop and be like, whoa, what just happened? And you're gonna take in information a little bit better because now I brought something familiar but surprised you, okay? It's kind of the same with variable rewards. So one of the reasons why Facebook and Instagram are so addicting is because every single time we get a like, we get a dopamine release, right? So you keep going back for more and more and more and more because you have a variable reward. You never know if a piece of content is going to be more liked or less liked. So you're going to keep trying new pieces of content and get more hooked into the platform. It's also the reason for FOMO, by the way. But let's take a step back and think about how many of you are excited to apply everything that's new in neuromarketing to your next campaigns, going from measurement to application. Show of hands. Okay, a few of you. Okay, and how many of you are really scared about what's happening here? Yep, a few of you too. Wonderful. Well, frankly, you should be a little bit of both, right? Because while this was a really benign low application that we discussed, there's actually way more going on behind the scenes that we're just starting to find out about. Oops. I'm sorry, I'm not good with this clicker at all. So while we used to gather data by having your moms and dads get paid to sit in a focus group and talk about the latest ketchup or candidate they like and they don't like, now we move to a world where you exchange your privacy and your data for free content, which means that the more content you consume, the more of yourself you give away. So we got to a point where above and beyond what you spend and who you vote for, you actually became the product. Because your brain and your data is one of the most valuable assets a corporation or a government can get at this point. Why is that? Because with the help of AI, it becomes one of the best machines to predict what you're going to buy and who you're going to vote for en masse. And you're giving this away for free. So why does this matter? Well, this matters because we used to, up until very recently, only think about your eyeballs. Your attention is everything that mattered. We needed to get your attention and keep it. And while we were focused on this attention economy out here, everything was happening behind the scenes in terms of your cognitive decision making, right? So now we have to take a step back and look behind what the eyes can see, literally, because we have to move away from attention and look deeper at everything that we give away. So from the way our brain works when we're online and we are continuously plugged into platforms, to wearables, to smart homes, right? Imagine a world where I could tap into 10 million women around the world who all have a wearable in real time and ask them to participate for me in a 24-hour test. Let's say I'm just launching my new ketchup campaign in 30 countries, and I can see everything they feel, because I have their biometrics, in real time, and how they're interacting with different content out of home and online about my ketchup. You imagine? Also, you know that treadmill habit that you have and the coffee and the wine you drink? It's not your little secret anymore because Fitbit knows it. Not only do they know it, they can plug it in and correlate it with all of your other data to actually make decisions about how to sell you new coffee, new wine, or new ketchup. If you think about it at an even deeper level, Facebook really tapped into our reptilian brains. Do you remember the time where you knew all of your best friends' birthdays? But you don't have to do that anymore now, because Facebook reminds you. In fact, I don't have to remember where I went to dinner for my birthday last year, because I can just look through my Instagram feed. So suddenly I realized that I have an external hard drive for my brain. It knows when I'm there, what I'm doing, what I'm looking at. It serves me new information through familiar friends or brands. It's continuously plugged into everything I do. In fact, it probably knows more about me than I know about myself because, again, I don't know exactly what I know about myself. My brain hides things. So then am I surprised that it influences my decision making? But before we move on and finish up today's topic, I want to remind you that this is really a beautiful time that we live in. It's a time where art such as this is actually art created by a neuroscientist and an artist, and it's called the reflective self. And what this allows you to do is when you look at it, your brain is actually looking at itself. It's one of the most intricate art pieces that talks about the brain. And this is just the beginning of what we can do today because we understand ourselves better and better as a species. So before we wrap up, again for today, I'd like to open it up for a few questions. And I'm happy to take any and all of them. I know they're going through the app, and I don't know exactly how that works. But go ahead.
Do you think it's a good thing that I can gather all this information, or is it scary?
You know what? I think it's a little bit of both. I think the more information we have, the more responsibility we have to protect it, right? But we also can't go backwards in time and hide from information. That's not an option anymore. So I think it's both good and scary, but the beautiful thing about it is that we know about it and we have the option to do something about it. But it is time to do something about it. We can't just continue going this way, and I'll talk a little bit about this as I wrap it up. Thank you.
From an ethical point of view, do you think that maybe going about this and I would say leveraging it in marketing would be a bit unethical? That's my question.
Listen. That's a great question, right? So the question was...
Sorry, can she repeat the question? I'm sorry, for other people to hear.
Yeah, I'll repeat the question. The question was, is using neuromarketing and the understanding of the subconscious decision-making pattern unethical for marketing? I think that's a great question. So first of all, it has been used since the 20s, technically. That's when we started using it. I think it only becomes unethical if we drive behavior that is negative or violent or antisocial, as Bernays said, right? If we use the understanding of what we have about the subconscious decision-making to drive certain purchasing behaviors that are not unhealthy and they're not unethical, then I don't believe there's an ethical problem there, right? But I think it's when we start looking at what's good for people and what's not good for people where things come up.
When you come to think about that, I think there's a very, very fine line between manipulating
Is it working? Okay. So what I was trying to say is that when you think about that, there's a very fine line between manipulating and leveraging, manipulating and leveraging what we know about the neuroscience for getting people to buy our products, for example, and for actually just like what you're saying is, for me, I think it's a bit relative. We're saying that if it's for a good cause, if it's not driving any negative behavior, then it's okay. But don't you think that this is relative? Like what you would think that is not really, yes, it's not really violent behavior for me. It might. What you think is something that's good for society, for example, it might be for me not. So, like, where do we draw the line? Where do we draw the line when we say we have to put an end to leveraging and using and manipulating people's minds and decisions through neuroscience?
Okay, so I think that's a fantastic point. I don't know where the line is. I think where we find ourselves today is to start that conversation. I think we've gotten so far by turning a blind eye to how we're using marketing, how we're using data. As more and more data gets gathered, we did hit that point where we need to make that decision. And I think we need to make that decision globally. You know, one of the really interesting things that's happening right now is the advent of a new economy. That's a trust economy. Because we don't trust anymore what's happening, right? So I think your question is perfect, and it's a question that needs to get posed globally. People around the world need to come to a decision and an agreement that might differ regionally about what's acceptable and what's not. I think even more, we know that we don't have the answer to that. So thank you for that. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do we know like how far are we going with this, like in the future, 2 years from now even, like where's it gonna get us? Do you have any idea?
That's a great question. I think where it's getting us is starting the conversation, because here's the thing. We've gotten now so far with neuromarketing and overlaying that with AI. We don't even know how far we are down the road. I think number one, we need to figure out where we stand and set rules for the future. But one thing we do know is that going back to the sleep temples or Edward Bernays or Facebook, one thing hasn't changed is the way that we make decisions, and it's our need to stay safe. And I think where we find ourselves, and going back to your question, is that for the first time, we don't feel safe with technology. And that changed very much, because we used to be very generous when we got safety, right? So if a government or a platform or a brand made us feel safe, then we'd give them trust in return. As a matter of fact, we put so much trust in technology that we let it into our homes with smart homes. We let it into the way we work. How could we work without technology at this point, all of us around the room, right? In the way we communicate and connect. But now, for the first time, we're starting to lose that trust and push away and starting to look at what technology has done to change our lives so rapidly with very different eyes. And I think what that is taking us from the economy of attention, right, getting your attention, to an economy of trust. And that's where I mentioned that we see blockchain becoming very relevant in the past year alone. Blockchain's actually been around for 12 years. Nobody's really heard of it until now because it wasn't relevant. But now, because we're looking at ways to decentralize power and decentralize data hoarding and information, blockchain certainly becomes a very important factor of letting people own their own data and manage and manipulate their own lives. So I think I would like to conclude on the following thought, okay? Trust is the number one thing that brands can have from us right now. And trust is more valuable even than our data at this point. Because without trust, there's no more engagement on the platforms. And without engagement, there's no more data. And when we get there, I believe that we all collectively lose. Thank you.